lap. Now, if I would resist, or say, no, I don't really want to, he would say it a little more firm. No, sit here on my lap. It starts subtly that way with, hand on the knee, then a little sliding up. It's gradual. Now, granted, as it gets more and more involved, the kissing gets longer, the kissing becomes inappropriate, the touching becomes inappropriate. Inside, your instincts are saying, wait a minute, wait a second, I don't know if this is right. But then the person's so intimidating, or there's a position of authority, you're too afraid to stop it.
All right, so let's take a minute with that for a second, because I know, that can be difficult to hear from a survivor, and Peter and Christy are not their real names, I didn't say that. So you heard a little bit, the first part of the video, how did these two abusers gain access? How did they gain access? How do they gain access to these children? From their parents, right? So you heard Peter say he was my brother's friend, he was friends with my family, my parents, stepfather, got into a relationship and became part of that household. The other thing you heard was Christy talked about all of a sudden we moved to a new place that was more isolated, right? So some of that happened. What about the grooming? What did Peter talk about with grooming? How was he groomed? There was some of the family that was groomed too, right? The fact that they were friends and gained access through that friendship. But there were some other things that happened. He was an athlete. So he got gifts, right? You heard about the gifts. You heard about going to the games. Those are typical things that abusers will use as ways to gain access, right? Be where there's children, to befriend the family, to isolate. Those are some typical things that occur. So, again, just things to think about. For all of us to remember, that's where this, this is how it happens. The grooming process, both of them talked about it being a gradual entry into their lives. Chrissy said it was all of a sudden he was there, but even the abuse was gradual. So it's not that stranger danger, that immediate violation, that immediate attack or anything like that. It is gradual. The abusers are going to establish relationships with the child, with the family members, with the adults that are around them. So that's why it's important for all of us as the adults around the children to be mindful, to be aware, to be vigilant. Again, regardless if you're a teacher or a coach, a parent, a friend of a family member, there's a process that these individuals take, and we can see that and be mindful of that. They're working to ensure that there's trust, there's that power position as an adult for those individuals, for those children, right? They can't, Christy said, I didn't feel like I could come forward and say anything because he had the authority. It is a fact, right? We know from research that abusers seek out children and families who appear vulnerable. So that also includes those children who have disabilities. They're 3 times more likely to be victimized than children without disabilities. So something to think about. That's the grooming process. That's what they're looking for. Abusers can't be anyone. They look like anyone, male, female, rich, poor. It's not the creepy person around the corner. It's not that person that, overwhelmingly, it's people that children trust. They come from all walks of life, all faiths, all religions. So it's even a fact that we, continue to see juveniles as offenders of sexual abuse against other juveniles. So actually, in a third of reported cases of child sexual abuse, the abusers themselves are children or minors. Many of those juveniles do have experienced abuse themselves. But I want to be clear, right? So although many of the juveniles who go on to abuse have experienced abuse, that does not mean that because someone is abused, they will go on to abuse anyone else. So it's not an automatic. I don't want anybody to walk out of this room thinking that, but there is that connection. And ultimately, an abuser is someone who has both power and authority over that child in some way. Most children won't tell. Why? Why do you think that is? Most children won't tell. Think about that for a second. A third of children won't tell, about average. A third of children will wait until the average age of 52 to come forward to tell anyone, as an adult. and a third of children come forward right away. Why don't they tell? Anybody? Why do you think they don't tell? Afraid, right? Afraid. Anything else? Just call it out. It's all right. Call it out. I know it's been a long day. They're afraid. Why else? They think it's their fault.
They're embarrassed.
They're embarrassed, right? There's a stigma. I grew up in a time where we said we don't talk about those things. What happens in the house, you don't tell anybody. And I know there's still a lot of people who have that mentality. We don't go outside the house to tell anyone. There's lots of reasons children don't tell. Part of the reason that we do the safe environment lessons with students is to encourage them to tell, to let them know that they do have a voice. When they're abused, you heard Chrissy say, your power's taken away from you, right? We want to empower children with the information that they need. And part of that is also you as those adults, parents, to be able to encourage your children and create that safe space that they can tell you anything they want. So they might be afraid because oftentimes abusers will threaten them. They'll threaten them not just physically, that does happen, but sometimes it's, if you tell someone you won't see me anymore, and you like me, right? I'm your friend. Or you're going to get in trouble because you were doing something you shouldn't have been doing. It is not unusual for that child to love that adult who's harming them. Whether it's physical, sexual, whatever. You think about a time maybe where you may have gotten angry at your child or a child and even not hit, but yelled at them and said, oh my gosh, you're getting on my nerves right now. You can say that, but just imagine that you said something like that, and they're like, oh, they start crying. You never tell them that, right? You're getting on my nerves. Knock it off, and they start crying. What do? They come to you, even though you yelled at them, even though you said, I'm angry with you, right? They're like, I'm sad. I want, because you're the comfort, right? So they have those relationships with those adults. They may have been bribed. They may receive gifts. They may like the gifts. They don't want to cut the gifts off. They don't separate the two. They're afraid that no one's going to believe them. Because the abusers have said, no one's going to believe you. They may even see that this is a trusted and respected person, so they would assume, who's going to be believed? And this is also true not just for children, but for adults as well. No one's going to believe me over that person who is, do you think Peter probably thought, nobody's going to believe me over the CYO coach, that he's loved and everybody knows him in the community. And there's family loyalty. Children do want to protect the family. They don't want others harmed. So these are all different reasons why people, or children rather, don't tell. So I want to look quickly at the impact of abuse. So you're going to hear back from Christy and Peter, and they share how the abuse has impacted them. They're adults and they're still talking about it. Christy's still in a slow way. So there's still impact, long-term impact. These are the reasons why it's important that we have these conversations, that we do everything we can do to prevent abuse, and also that everything we can do to intervene as quickly as possible. So as you hear their stories, think about whether or not you can identify what was this impact that this had on their lives.
It was age 12 and 13 when now you start kissing boys for the first time. In my case, I went along with that. If the boy wanted to kiss, I kissed him right back. Like, there was no boundaries. Was not taught boundaries.
The abuse took place over a 2-year period from the age of 14 to 16. As a young high school kid, the substance abuse was the coping mechanism that I used to bury the pain.
I was drinking destructively in the end because I hadn't dealt with putting all the pieces into place and accepting and really feeling what I had been through. I had closed it off because if you sit in the quiet with those emotions, it's like standing on the edge of a cliff and you can very easily step off and go to a place of no return. The long-term damage is emotional. I'm not physically hurt today. It's emotionally that the damage still lingers. The feelings of guilt, shame, and this idea that you're not worthy is something I work very, very diligently against, even now. And that's the part that needs to be healed. built over time. But if that's done and the people around the victim help and support that, there's hope. There's hope there.
Addressing the families of a survivor or a victim, I think is important to pay attention to as well, because they're part of it, especially if you have a strong support system, or, you know, if in the unfortunate situation you don't. You know, that can be, play a big role in someone's recovery.
My relationship with God in all of this has been a journey. Absolutely, I have gone through a raging place of why did this happen to me? How could you let this happen to me? And then I kind of put it in a place of, but God gives us free will. And He lets us do as humans what we are going to do, even bad things. For a long time, I thought that God was in that room and that He didn't stop it. And I took issue with that, big issue. I had a change of heart when someone said, absolutely, God was in that room. He was weeping for you. He was crying for you. That it broke his heart.
Breath on that one. It's tough stuff, right? You didn't know this was an interactive meeting. You thought this was a Women's School Association meeting. I'm going to come, she's going to say a couple things, I'm going to walk out. All right, so the interaction. What did you hear about the impact? How did this impact them? What were some of the things? Just call them out. What did Peter talk about?
Guilt.
Drug abuse, right? He used some substances to cope. What else? What else impact? What stood out? Alcoholism. What else? Anything else? What else was impacted?
Their faith.
Their faith. Absolutely. That one gets me every time. I've seen this video so many times. And I was there when they spoke. I was in the room with them when they were filming. Their faith, the relationships get impacted. There's so much that happens that impacts. I'm going to make the point of the impact on abuse, and I'll come back to that in a second. The impact can differ on how much abuse, how long, how violent, how the age of the child. If intervention happened early, that's why early intervention, knowing those signs, seeing something, saying something, asking children what's going on is important, because the impact can vary considerably. And one of the best ways to lessen the impact is to get immediate assistance and to stop the abuse. There's unique aspects to all of that. There can be impact on relationships, and before I move on to this, let me just make this statement, because I don't want to forget. Peter and Christy were a blessing that came into my life to offer to work with us to create this video. So they came into my life in 2014. We were seeking people to do an educational video, and they wanted to do this to make sure that, again, the abuse never happens to anyone else. And my promised commitment to them was that I would show this video and share their words with anyone and everyone I could. And so I continue to do that. I did not know how I could ever repay them for the blessing that they gave me, my office, you all, the Archdiocese, with their words. In 2015, when Pope Francis came as part of World Meeting of Families, he asked if he could meet with survivors of abuse. And I was fortunate enough to be able to reach back out to them and invite them to that meeting. So they gave me the blessing of their words and sharing their experiences. And then I, was able to share in the blessing with them to have that meeting with Pope Francis. So very meaningful. And I always like to share that, because you never know where the blessings come from. So I was also then secondly blessed to be able to be part of that and meet with them. So when we talk about the impact on relationships, right? Peter talks about, you didn't hear in the video, but Peter shared how his marriage was impacted years and years later. Matter of fact, he was one of the third that didn't tell anyone until he was well into his 40s. He was having marital issues. And he talked to his wife, and they were going to marital counseling. And after one of the counseling sessions, his wife said, "Were you abused by such and such? And it was like, and that's when it opened up, and he was able to finally deal with and address those issues, because he'd never told anybody. It could impact those relationships. It could impact the way, even Christy talked about how she felt about herself and the environment, how she engaged with boys. She had no boundaries. She didn't know what boundaries were. So if she said, if someone would kiss me, I would go along with it, because I didn't know that this wasn't the right thing to do. Again, part of the education and the communication we should have with children is about boundaries, is about that they can say no, is about what the proper interactions are, right? How to properly engage and interact. There can be an impact on learning. It's hard for children who've experienced abuse to regulate emotions, to use their executive functioning, that part of the brain that helps us think, because they're in their lower part of the brain that's like, okay, I'm stressed, I'm anxious, I'm in that fight or flight mode all the time. Anybody ever hear of that? Fight or flight, right? That's down here. That's where they tend to live longer. It's harder to be attentive. So a child who is not paying attention, is is not able to realize cause and effect. If I do this, it can be harmful. That could be the impact on the learning. So that's how we see the impact. It can impact behavior. Where we might see a child acting out and being aggressive, might be because there's some type of trauma or experience that they've had. 10% of children who have categorized with having multiple experiences that are negative in their life actually have a greater, 1,200% greater risk at attempting suicide. So all of these things that impact our children when they're small, and they're young, and they're growing up, can have lifelong impact. Those children who are withdrawing from situations, who are trying to be too perfect, doesn't mean it's abuse, but there might be something there that they're experiencing stressors. So I want to give you that disclaimer too. I'm not saying that these are all indicators of abuse, but they could be indicators that something is going on. And it doesn't necessarily mean abuse. It could be that they're stressed, they're anxious about something else. We should pay attention to children's behavior and youth. I always use children, but children and youth. Their behavior is the words that they're unspoken. Even if they have the language to express it, the behavior will show you before anything else. So we all have a role to play. We all have a role to play in keeping children safe, and I'm so grateful that you're all here this evening with me to just listen and keep an open mind. That's why we train. That's why we should keep having the conversations with our children. That's why we should support the school and the faculty in the conversations that they're having as well. It's important for when we do the prevention education lessons in our schools, we want you to have those conversations at home as well. There's the concepts being reinforced at home. It gives them the opportunity to apply that information into daily life. It helps to prevent abuse from occurring. When we don't talk about things, when it's a secret or it's hidden or it's hushed, that's where their evil grows. That's where the evil grows. When we partner together, it really is an important piece that they're hearing the lesson. Their open communication between a parent and a child and an adult in their life is really key at helping them to understand what's right from wrong, that they have a voice, that they have a choice. You heard Christy, right? I didn't feel like I had any power. I didn't feel like I could talk to anyone. So far we've talked about, partnerships a little bit. We talked about parents and schools. We looked at the definition of abuse, looked at some of the important facts. Think about, we talked about who are the victims, who are the abusers, what does abuse look like. We looked at the grooming process, right, all those things. But let's look at prevention for a second. At the heart of successful prevention by parents, with partnership with schools and other adults, and even, bring this information back to your brothers and your sisters, the aunts and uncles in the neighborhood community. It allows children to, nothing went ahead, it allows children to really feel that safety network, that connection. It can, if we talk about these things, we let children know that they have a voice, they have choice, that it gives them that self-esteem. When we look at some practical tips, first, really make a priority to have conversations with your children. All right, now you're thinking, I don't feel comfortable talking about sexual abuse with my children every day. Let me tell you, that's not what I'm talking about. You know where my son always liked to have conversations? In the car. I worked 9 to 5 as a single parent. I would pick him up from his after-school program by 6 o'clock because I didn't want to pay $20 a minute afterwards. That was maybe 5 minutes or something like that, I don't know. And I'd get him in the car, we had about a 20-minute drive home. And inevitably, he unpacked, I stressed, because of all the conversations that came up. But that's because he knew that that was the safe space, that he had my attention, I wasn't on my phone, I wasn't doing anything else, that he could talk and ask. And we had every kind of conversation you could imagine, even the one of where babies came from. And not just where do babies come from as in, but like how. As the age appropriateness, and if he's asking a question, I'm answering the question. So these conversations really can be at planned times, and for him they were planned, and for me I started planning some questions and thoughts and how to unpack with him in that ride home, because I knew that's where he was giving me his attention. Think about asking open-ended questions, not just the yes or no. Did you have a good day? Yes. There's no conversation there. Where's the conversation? What did you learn today? Who made you happy today? Did anybody make you sad today? Was there any difficulty, right? And then kind of unpacking. Who's your favorite teacher? Everybody who's in here, right, are the ones who have favorite teachers. What did you enjoy in school? What was your favorite activity for us to do as a family? Think about those kind of questions. You also give them an opportunity to make some decisions. Think about, where do you want to go to dinner? Do you want McDonald's or Burger King? Because that's what we always did, because on the way home at 6:30 at night, I wasn't getting in the house, and usually because I forgot to defrost something, let's be honest, and he was, too young to defrost it for me. So, think about, can you give the options? It's important to do that, even the little options, because it helps build that self-esteem and confidence that, as we heard from Peter and Christy, might be broken down by other things happening to them. Gives them that opportunity. Let them give some input. Take advantage of those teachable moments. I know I have been in the market, and I've heard somebody talking to someone else negatively. If you hear that, has anybody ever heard that? Okay, not just me, not just my neighbor, okay. So, I look for that opportunity. This thing is on auto forward. I look for that opportunity to say, wow, that was really harsh what that person said. That would hurt my feelings if that was said like that. If anybody ever said anything like that to you, I hope you would tell me, or I hope you would talk to a trusted adult and let them know that your feelings were hurt, or if anybody hurt you or said anything that was mean or anything like that, or did anything appropriate. Look for those opportunities to engage in that conversation. Always talk to your children using the proper terminology for their body parts. It is important that children are able to identify their body parts and tell someone when something is hurting or something has been violated. So it's always important. That knowledge will increase the likelihood, will decrease their likelihood of being abused. You know why? Because that abuser is going to say, this kid knows exactly what they're talking about. And they're going to tell someone if I hurt them. So it gives them language. Not every kid, but it's part of that, keeping that safe. It's important, and I know you before had technology presentation, so I'm not going to go over that, and I purposely just wanted to ping this in your mind and remind you. It's important that we think about how to protect our children online. If you don't know about technology, do your research. You can always go to the website for the Archdiocese Office of Child and Youth Protection. There's information there. NetSmarts is also a good website. It's from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So if you remember nothing else, you can remember that. Just Google it and get to their website. They have programs that you can watch with your kids, or you can learn yourself, even figure out what the TikTok is, or the Gram, or what all that. Yeah, I know. I'm that old that I'm like the Facebook. Okay. So, if you don't feel comfortable with that information, look for information. Really, it's important that we educate ourselves. So I went through a lot of things. We're like, oof, right? But you know what? Children can recover from abuse. So even though we heard how the impact was with Christy and with Peter, if you met them today, they would talk about how they have found healing. Christy was able to reconnect with her faith. Peter was able to come clean and talk to his family and come clean with why he was using and misusing substances, why he was experiencing those things. So there is healing, and that can happen. I have faith in that. If I didn't, it would be difficult. And I also have lots of faith that we can prevent abuse, not just be responsive So I went through a lot of stuff quickly. I did take a lot of your time this evening. I just want you to know that, we have information on our website, that's what it looks like. We do, promote all kinds of, prevention throughout the year in our programs. If you have any questions for me, I'll stick around. You can talk to me individually. My contact information is there, here, as well as on that brochure. I'm grateful that you attended today, even when you saw the name of my office, thinking I'm still gonna come anyway. Because it is a difficult conversation. But if it's difficult for us, how difficult do you think it is for our kids to ask for help? So, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm really grateful for your time this evening, and I will stop talking. Thank you so much, everyone.